Lieutenant Sarah Chen stepped out of the dusty Humvee at forward operating base Reaper, her pristine combat boots hitting the Afghan soil with a soft thud. The desert wind whipped her dark hair against her face as she adjusted her equipment bag and looked around at what would be her home for the next 18 months. "Well, well, well," came a gravelly voice from behind a stack of sandbags. "Look what the brass sent us for Christmas." Sarah turned to see a group of soldiers lounging in whatever shade they could find, their uniforms faded and weathered from months in the desert. Their weapons were clean, but showed the wear of constant use, and their eyes held the hard edge that came from too many firefights and too little sleep. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez emerged from the group, his thick arms crossed over his chest. At 35, he had more combat experience than most officers twice his age, and it showed in the way he carried himself. "You must be our new intelligence officer, Lieutenant Chen, right?" "That's correct, Sergeant," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the obvious skepticism in his tone. Rodriguez looked her up and down slowly, taking in her unmarked gear and spotless uniform. "Tell me, Lieutenant, where exactly did you serve before this assignment?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I completed my training at Fort Huachuca and served 18 months at the Pentagon in intelligence analysis." The soldiers behind Rodriguez exchanged glances, and someone let out a low whistle. "Pentagon," Rodriguez repeated, shaking his head. "Boys, we got ourselves a real desk warrior here. Specialist Tommy Watkins, barely 21 but already hardened by 8 months of combat, laughed from his position cleaning his rifle. Bet she's never even heard a shot fired in anger, Sergeant. I've completed all required combat training, Sarah said evenly, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. Training, Rodriguez scoffed. That's real cute, Lieutenant. Training doesn't prepare you for the smell of burning flesh or the sound a man makes when he's dying. Training doesn't teach you what it's like when your best friend's blood is splattered all over your face. The group had grown larger now, with more soldiers drifting over to witness the new arrival being put in her place. Sarah noticed they all had the same look in their eyes, a mixture of amusement and barely concealed contempt. Corporal Lisa Martinez stepped forward. Her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had seen better days. As one of only 3 women in the unit, she seemed particularly interested in sizing up the newcomer. "We heard through the grapevine that you graduated top of your class at Huachuca. That true?" "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, unsure where this was leading. Martinez smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Academic achievement? That's nice. Real nice. Tell me, Lieutenant, when you were studying your maps and analyzing your intel reports, did anyone bother to tell you that the Taliban don't give a damn about your test scores?" The laughter that followed was harsh and bitter. These soldiers had lost friends, had watched good men and women die horrible deaths. And here was this fresh-faced officer who looked like she belonged in a recruitment poster rather than a combat zone. Captain James Morrison chose that moment to approach, his weathered face showing the strain of command in one of the most dangerous areas of Afghanistan. At 42, he had been fighting America's wars for over 2 decades, and he had learned to read people quickly. "Lieutenant Chen, I see you've met the team," Morrison said, his tone neutral but watchful. "Rodriguez, get her situated in the officers' quarters and brief her on current operations." "Sir, with respect," Rodriguez began, "maybe the lieutenant would be more comfortable back in Kandahar. We're a tight unit here and we can't afford any weak links." Morrison's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you questioning my personnel decisions, Sergeant?" "No, sir," Rodriguez replied quickly. "Just looking out for unit cohesion." "Unit cohesion comes from doing your job, not from picking and choosing who belongs here," Morrison said firmly. "The lieutenant stays. Brief her on Operation Iron Shield." As Morrison walked away, Rodriguez turned back to Sarah with obvious reluctance. "All right, Princess, let's get you settled. But understand this, in the field, your college degrees don't mean jack. Out here people die when mistakes get made." Sarah followed Rodriguez through the base, listening as he provided a running commentary on their current situation. Fob Reaper was positioned in the Korangal Valley, one of the most contested areas in Afghanistan. The Taliban had been particularly active lately, launching increasingly sophisticated attacks against coalition forces. "We've been tracking a high-value target for 3 months now," Rodriguez explained as they walked past the communications center. "Goes by the name Scorpion. He's been coordinating attacks throughout the region, and intel suggests he's planning something big." "What kind of something big?" Sarah asked, pulling out a notepad. Rodriguez glanced at the notepad and shook his head. "Rule number 1, Lieutenant. Nothing gets written down that doesn't absolutely have to be. Too many ways for information to end up in the wrong hands." Sarah put the notepad away, feeling foolish. "What can you tell me about this Scorpion?" "He's smart, he's ruthless, and he knows how to disappear when the heat gets too high. We've come close to getting him twice, but he always seems to know we're coming. That's where you come in." Supposedly. They reached a small building that served as the intelligence center, little more than a concrete box with communication equipment and wall maps covered in pins and colored string. Rodriguez gestured around the cramped space. "This is your kingdom, Lieutenant. You've got access to satellite feeds, drone footage, intercepted communications, and whatever else the big brains back at headquarters think we need. Your job is to figure out where Scorpion is going to hit next." Sarah surveyed the equipment, noting the outdated computers and jury-rigged communication systems. "This is what I have to work with?" "Welcome to the real army, Princess," Rodriguez said with satisfaction. "Not quite like your Pentagon office, is it?" Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into the work, studying patterns of previous attacks, analyzing intercepted communications, and poring over drone footage until her eyes burned. But despite her efforts, she felt like she was missing something crucial. The other soldiers continued to treat her with a mixture of amusement and disdain. During meals, they would tell war stories specifically designed to make her uncomfortable, describing firefights and casualties in graphic detail while watching her reaction. When she tried to contribute tactical insights based on her analysis, they would listen with barely concealed impatience before dismissing her suggestions. "You see, Lieutenant," Watkins said during one particularly tense briefing, "the problem with intelligence analysis is that it assumes the enemy is logical. But these guys aren't logical. They're fanatics. And fanatics don't follow the rules you learned in your textbooks." Even the enlisted personnel had picked up on the officer's attitude toward their new intelligence officer. Sarah could hear whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, and she caught glimpses of eye rolls and head shakes when she spoke during meetings. The breaking point came during her second week at Fob Reaper. Sarah had been tracking communication patterns and believed she had identified a potential target for Scorpion's next attack. A convoy route that would be used by a supply run the following day. She brought her analysis to Captain Morrison during his morning briefing. "Sir, I believe there's a 70% probability that the convoy will be ambushed here," she said, pointing to a narrow section of road that wound between 2 hills. "The communication intercepts suggest increased chatter in this area, and the terrain provides excellent cover for an ambush." Morrison studied the map, then looked at Rodriguez. "What do you think, Sergeant?" Rodriguez barely glanced at Sarah's analysis. "Sir, we've used that route dozens of times without incident. The lieutenant's been here 2 weeks, and she thinks she knows the area better than we do. With respect, I think she's seeing patterns that aren't there." Corporal Martinez nodded in agreement. "Sir, we've been monitoring that area for months. If there was Taliban activity there, we would have detected it by now." Sarah felt her frustration boiling over. "The intercepts clearly indicate—" "The intercepts," Rodriguez interrupted, "could mean anything. You're trying to connect dots that don't exist because you need to justify your presence here." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, he made his decision. "We'll proceed with the original route. The convoy leaves at 800 tomorrow. Sarah wanted to argue further, but she could see it was pointless. These soldiers had already made up their minds about her, and nothing she said would change that. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the distant sound of artillery fire, Sarah wondered if perhaps they were right. Maybe she was just a Pentagon desk jockey who didn't belong in a combat zone. Maybe all her training and education meant nothing in the real world where bullets were real and mistakes cost lives. But deep in her gut, she knew something was wrong with tomorrow's mission. The intelligence was there, hidden in the patterns of communication intercepts and movement reports. She could feel it like a physical ache, the certainty that the convoy was walking into a trap. She thought about calling in favors, reaching out to contacts back at the Pentagon who might be able to provide additional intelligence assets. But that would only confirm what everyone already believed about her, that she was just another bureaucrat who couldn't function without her Washington support network. As dawn approached, Sarah made a decision that would either vindicate her analysis or destroy what little credibility she had left. She quietly gathered her equipment and prepared to prove that the Pentagon desk warrior might just know a thing or two about fighting a war. The convoy would leave at 800, but Sarah would be in position to monitor the suspected ambush site at 700. If she was wrong, she would quietly return to base and accept whatever consequences came. But if she was right, she might just save some lives, and maybe earn a small measure of respect from the soldiers who had written her off as a show pony. Outside her window, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to creep across the Afghan landscape, and somewhere out there, Sarah was certain that Scorpion was preparing to strike. The only question was whether anyone would be ready for him when he did. Sarah moved through the pre-dawn darkness with practiced silence, her movements fluid and controlled despite the heavy communication equipment strapped to her back. She had memorized the terrain from satellite photos, but seeing it in person confirmed her worst fears. The narrow pass between the two hills was perfect for an ambush, limited escape routes, excellent cover for attackers, and clear fields of fire down onto the road below. She found an observation position on the northern hill that gave her good sight lines while keeping her hidden from both the road and the opposite hillside. As she set up her equipment, she couldn't help but think about the looks on her teammates' faces if they could see her now. The Pentagon desk warrior was about to go crawling around in the dirt, trying to prove she belonged. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the convoy route stretching out below. In 2 hours, 6 vehicles carrying critical supplies would come around that bend, and if her analysis was correct, they would drive straight into a kill zone. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. She activated her radio and switched to the encrypted frequency used by base communications. "Reaper Base, this is Eagle Eye. Radio check. Over." The response came back immediately. "Eagle Eye, this is Reaper Base. We read you 5 by 5. What's your status?" Sarah hesitated. She wasn't supposed to be out here, and calling in would reveal her unauthorized position. But if she was right about the ambush, the convoy would need all the warning she could provide. "Reaper Base, Eagle Eye is in position for overwatch of Route Bravo. Beginning surveillance now." There was a pause, and Sarah could almost hear the confusion on the other end. "Eagle Eye, confirm your authorization for this position." "Reaper Base, this is a precautionary measure based on intelligence analysis. We'll maintain radio contact." Before the base could respond further, Sarah switched frequencies to monitor Taliban communications. Her language training included Pashto, and while she wasn't fluent, she could understand enough to pick up tactical information. For the first hour, the airwaves were quiet. Sarah began to wonder if perhaps Rodriguez and the others were right. Maybe she was seeing patterns that didn't exist, connecting dots that were just random coincidence. The desert stretched out peacefully below her, showing no signs of hostile activity. Then, at 0745, her headset crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. "The birds will be here soon. came a voice speaking in Pashto. "All hunters take positions." Sarah's fingers flew across her equipment as she tried to pinpoint the transmission source. The signal was coming from multiple locations, at least 3 different positions on the hillsides around the convoy route. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a carefully coordinated trap. She switched back to the base frequency. "Reaper Base, this is Eagle Eye. I have multiple hostile transmissions indicating imminent ambush of convoy. Recommend immediate route change." "Eagle Eye, stand by," came the reply, and Sarah could hear heated discussion in the background. Meanwhile, the Taliban chatter was increasing. Sarah listened with growing alarm as the voices coordinated their positions, discussed fields of fire, and confirmed the timing of their attack. They knew exactly when the convoy would arrive, which meant they had been watching American movements for days. "Reaper Base," Sarah called again, more urgently this time. "The hostiles are in position. They're waiting for the convoy. You need to divert now." Captain Morrison's voice came over the radio, tight with irritation. "Eagle Eye, return to base immediately. The convoy will proceed as planned." Sarah felt a surge of frustration. Lives were at stake, and they were dismissing her intelligence because of their preconceived notions about her abilities. She made a decision that went against every regulation in the book. Switching to the convoy frequency, she called directly to the lead vehicle. "Convoy leader, this is Eagle Eye. You are approaching a confirmed ambush position. Multiple hostiles in overwatch positions. Recommend immediate halt and route change." "Eagle Eye, this is Convoy Leader," came the response from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who was riding in the lead vehicle. "Identify yourself and your authority for this transmission." "Convoy Leader, this is Lieutenant Chen. I am in overwatch position and have confirmed hostile intent through intercepted communications. The ambush is real." There was a long pause, and Sarah could imagine Rodriguez's reaction to learning that the Pentagon desk warrior was freelancing in the field. When he responded, his voice was cold with anger. "Lieutenant, you are ordered to return to base immediately. We will not divert based on unauthorized intelligence gathering." The convoy continued moving toward the ambush site, and Sarah watched through her binoculars as the vehicles rounded the bend that would bring them into the kill zone. In desperation, she switched back to the Taliban frequency and heard the confirmation she had been dreading. "The birds are in the nest. Prepare to strike." What happened next would be talked about for years afterward in military intelligence circles, though the details were classified at levels that few people ever saw. Sarah Chen, the supposed Showpony soldier who had been written off as a Pentagon bureaucrat, demonstrated why she had really been sent to Forward Operating Base Reaper. Instead of simply observing and reporting, Sarah activated equipment that wasn't standard issue for intelligence officers. Her communication suite included capabilities that went far beyond basic radio intercepts. Within seconds, she had identified the exact locations of the Taliban fighters and begun something that would change everything. "Reaper Base, this is Eagle Eye," she called, her voice now carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "I have positive identification on 6 hostile positions. Transmitting coordinates now." Her equipment began uploading precise targeting data to every American asset in the area, artillery, air support, and even satellite systems that officially didn't exist. But more importantly, she activated a capability that made the enemy fighters freeze in confusion and terror. Using advanced electronic warfare techniques, Sarah began broadcasting on the Taliban frequency in perfect Pashto, but with a twist that sent chills through the ambush teams. "Scorpion," she said, using the call sign of the high-value target they had been hunting for months. "This is Shadow. Your position is compromised. All units withdraw immediately." The response was immediate and panicked. "Shadow? How are you on this frequency?" "We have communication security." Sarah smiled grimly as she continued the deception. "Your communications have been compromised for weeks. American forces know your exact positions. The ambush is canceled. Withdraw now or face immediate airstrike." Through her binoculars, she could see the Taliban fighters beginning to move, unsure whether to trust the voice on their radio, but unwilling to risk an airstrike. The confusion was exactly what she needed. She switched back to the convoy frequency. Convoy leader, hostile forces are withdrawing from ambush positions. You have a narrow window to proceed safely but maintain high alert. Rodriguez's voice came back, stunned. How did you... Eagle Eye, what just happened? Convoy leader, proceed to waypoint 3 and hold for further instructions. I'll maintain overwatch and continue monitoring hostile communications. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had recognized something in the Taliban chatter that no one else had caught. The real Scorpion wasn't just coordinating this ambush. He was personally present, directing operations from a command position about 2 kilometers east of the convoy route. Switching to a classified frequency that connected directly to Special Operations Command, Sarah transmitted coordinates and requested immediate action. Titan Base, this is Eagle Eye. I have eyes on Tango 7. Tango 7 was the military designation for Scorpion, the high-value target that conventional forces had been hunting unsuccessfully for months. Eagle Eye, confirm positive identification of Tango 7. Confirmed. Target is in command vehicle. Grid reference 417-25839. Window of opportunity is limited. What the soldiers at FOB Reaper didn't know was that Lieutenant Sarah Chen hadn't been sent to them as just another intelligence officer. She was part of a classified program that embedded specially trained operators within regular units, using their intelligence roles as cover for much more sophisticated operations. Her real call sign wasn't Eagle Eye, it was Ghost Rider, and she was one of only 12 officers in the Army with her specific set of skills and clearances. The Pentagon assignment that her teammates had mocked wasn't bureaucratic desk work. It was training on the most advanced intelligence and electronic warfare systems in the American arsenal. But even Sarah hadn't expected to use those capabilities so soon, or under circumstances where she would have to choose between maintaining her cover and preventing American casualties. The convoy made it through the pass safely, the would-be ambushers having melted away into the mountains in the face of Sarah's electronic warfare deception. But the real victory came 40 minutes later, when Special Operations Forces struck at the coordinates Sarah had provided and captured Scorpion along with his entire command team. As Sarah packed up her equipment and prepared to return to base, she knew that her life at FOB Reaper was about to become very different. She had blown her cover to save American lives and capture a high-value target, which meant explanations would be required and secrets would have to be revealed. She also knew that Rodriguez, Morrison, and the rest of the unit were going to have some very difficult questions about the Pentagon desk warrior who had just demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond anything in her official file. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the Afghan landscape, and somewhere in the distance, Sarah could hear helicopters approaching. The cavalry was coming, but this time they were coming for an extraction that would begin the second phase of her mission at FOB Reaper. As she started down the hillside, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Let them call her a Showpony soldier. Let them think she was just another Pentagon bureaucrat who didn't belong in a combat zone. Soon enough, they would learn that sometimes the most dangerous warriors were the ones nobody saw coming. The radio crackled in her ear with an incoming transmission from Captain Morrison. Eagle Eye, return to base immediately for debriefing. And Lieutenant, good work out there. Sarah keyed her radio one final time before switching back to her cover identity. Roger that, Reaper Base. Eagle Eye returning to base. But Ghost Rider was just getting started. The debriefing room at FOB Reaper had never been so crowded. Captain Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Martinez, while Specialist Watkins stood near the door looking confused and slightly intimidated. But it was the 2 men in unmarked uniforms who commanded everyone's attention. Colonel James Harrison from Special Operations Command and a civilian whose credentials identified him only as Mr. Williams from an agency that officially didn't exist. Sarah entered the room still wearing her dusty combat gear, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that was coming loose after her morning in the field. She looked every inch the junior officer who had stumbled into something bigger than herself, which was exactly the impression she wanted to maintain for a few more minutes. "Lieutenant Chen," Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to dealing with classified operations. "Would you please explain to your unit commander exactly what happened out there this morning?" Morrison leaned forward, his weathered face showing a mixture of confusion and growing concern. "Lieutenant, I need to understand how you managed to identify hostile positions with such precision. How you knew to intercept Taliban communications, and most importantly, how you were able to coordinate the capture of Scorpion when my unit has been hunting him for 3 months without success." Sarah glanced around the room, seeing the faces of the soldiers who had spent weeks dismissing her as a Pentagon showpony. Rodriguez sat with his arms crossed, his jaw tight with frustration. Martinez kept shaking her head as if trying to reconcile what she had witnessed with her preconceptions about their intelligence officer. Watkins just looked lost. "Sir," Sarah began carefully, "my analysis indicated a high probability of ambush at that location. When I monitored Taliban communications and confirmed hostile intent, I took appropriate action to protect American forces." "Appropriate action?" Rodriguez interrupted, his voice rough with barely contained anger. "Lieutenant, you had equipment out there that I've never seen before. You spoke to those Taliban fighters like you knew them personally, and somehow you convinced them to abandon their ambush. Then you pulled coordinates out of thin air that led Special Operations Forces directly to their high-value target. That's not standard intelligence analysis." Mr. Williams, who had remained silent until now, opened a file folder and pulled out several photographs. "Captain Morrison, what exactly were you told about Lieutenant Chen's assignment to your unit?" Morrison glanced uncertainly between the civilian and his intelligence officer. "I was told she was a highly qualified intelligence analyst being assigned to provide enhanced analytical capabilities for our operations against high-value targets in the region." "That's technically accurate," Williams said with a slight smile, "but it's not complete. Lieutenant Chen, I think it's time to brief your unit commander on the real scope of your mission here." Sarah straightened in her chair, and something subtle but profound shifted in her demeanor. The nervous energy that had characterized her interactions with the unit vanished, replaced by a calm confidence that made everyone in the room sit up and take notice. "Sir, my real name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, but my operational call sign is Ghost Rider. I'm part of a classified program called Project Shadow Strike, which embeds advanced warfare specialists within conventional units for deep cover operations against high-priority targets." The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. Rodriguez's mouth had fallen open, and Martinez was staring at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. Colonel Harrison took over the briefing. "Captain Morrison, your unit was selected to host this operation because of your proximity to Scorpion's area of operations and your reputation for operational security. Lieutenant Chen's cover as an inexperienced intelligence officer was necessary to avoid detection by enemy assets who might be monitoring for special operations deployments." "You mean she's been playing dumb this whole time?" Watkins asked, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah turned to look at the young specialist. "Not playing dumb, Watkins, but allowing you to draw conclusions based on your preconceptions. The best cover is the one that requires the least acting." Morrison was beginning to understand the implications. The equipment she had out there, that's not standard military issue. Lieutenant Chen has access to some of the most advanced electronic warfare and intelligence gathering systems in the American arsenal, Williams confirmed. Her training includes advanced linguistic capabilities, electronic warfare, deep cover operations, and precision targeting for special operations forces. Rodriguez was shaking his head in disbelief. The intercepts, The way you spoke to them in their own language, making them think you were their commander. That was all planned?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I've been monitoring Taliban communications in this region for months before I arrived here. I know their protocols, their call signs, and their command structure better than they do. When I impersonated Scorpion's intelligence officer, it wasn't improvisation, it was based on weeks of preparation." "But why the charade?" Martinez asked, clearly struggling to process what she was learning. "Why not just tell us who you really are?" Colonel Harrison answered. "Because Scorpion has demonstrated an uncanny ability to detect special operations presence. Every time we've deployed conventional special forces, he's disappeared before we could close the net. We needed someone who could operate under deep cover, embedded within a regular unit, with no apparent connection to special operations." Williams pulled out another set of photographs, these showing Sarah in various training environments, rappelling from helicopters, firing weapons with expert precision, and working with electronic equipment far more sophisticated than anything at FOB Reaper. Lieutenant Chen graduated first in her class from the Army's most advanced intelligence training program, Williams continued. She then completed additional training in electronic warfare, psychological operations, and covert communications. Her Pentagon assignment was cover for final preparation and mission briefing. Sarah could see the shock and dawning comprehension on the faces around the table. These soldiers who had spent weeks treating her like an inexperienced rookie were learning that she was actually one of the most highly trained operatives in the American military. "The Showpony act," Rodriguez said slowly, "was intentional." "It was necessary," Sarah replied. "You and your team needed to see me as harmless and inexperienced. If you had known what I really was, you would have treated me differently, and that change in behavior might have been detected by enemy surveillance." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what he had learned. "How long have you been planning the operation against Scorpion?" 6 months, Sarah answered. "Everything from my assignment here to the convoy route this morning was designed to create the opportunity we needed. Scorpion has been avoiding our conventional forces because he can identify them, but he didn't see me coming because I was hiding in plain sight." Watkins raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, when you said you completed combat training, you meant—" Sarah smiled at him for the first time since arriving at FOB Reaper, and it transformed her face completely. "I've completed Ranger School, Advanced Sniper Training, and Close Quarters Combat Certification. I'm qualified on every weapon system in the Army inventory and several that officially don't exist." The room was silent again as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Rodriguez spoke up, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and embarrassment. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We treated you like exactly what I needed you to treat me like," Sarah interrupted gently. "Sergeant, you and your team performed perfectly. Your skepticism and dismissiveness were crucial to maintaining my cover. If you had accepted me immediately as a competent operative, it would have raised red flags." Colonel Harrison stood up, signaling that the briefing was moving to its conclusion. "Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Chen's mission here isn't complete. Scorpion's capture was Phase 1. We've learned from his interrogation that he was coordinating with other high-value targets throughout the region. Lieutenant Chen will be expanding her operations to target these additional assets." "What does that mean for my unit?" Morrison asked. "It means," Williams said, "that you continue to operate normally, with Lieutenant Chen serving as your intelligence officer. The only difference is that now you know what she's really capable of." Sarah addressed her teammates directly. "I know this is a lot to process. For the past 3 weeks, I've been watching you risk your lives in combat while pretending to be someone I'm not. That wasn't easy, and I understand if you're angry about the deception." Martinez was the first to respond. "Are you kidding me? You saved the convoy this morning, captured Scorpion, and probably prevented dozens of future attacks. I don't care what you pretended to be. I care what you actually accomplished." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I've been fighting in Afghanistan for 3 tours, and this is the first real victory I've seen against their command structure. If playing the Pentagon desk jockey was what it took to get Scorpion, then it was worth it. Watkins was grinning now. Wait until the rest of the guys hear about this. They're going to feel like idiots for calling you a show pony. Actually, Sarah said, they can't know. My cover remains in place for ongoing operations. As far as the rest of the base is concerned, I got lucky with some good intelligence analysis this morning. Colonel Harrison gathered his files. Captain Morrison, you and your senior NCOs are now read into Project Shadow Strike. Everything discussed here today is classified at the highest levels. You will continue to operate as before, but with full knowledge of Lieutenant Chen's capabilities. As the briefing broke up and people filed out of the room, Rodriguez approached Sarah. Ma'am, I need to ask you something. Go ahead, Sergeant. When we first met, and I was giving you grief about never hearing a shot fired in anger, you could have shut me down any time. You have more combat experience than anyone on this base. Why did you let me run my mouth? Sarah considered the question carefully. Because you needed to believe I was inexperienced, but also because some of what you said was true. I've never lost a soldier under my command because I've never had soldiers under my command until now. My training is extensive, but it's different from yours. You've kept your people alive in one of the most dangerous places on Earth for months. That kind of experience can't be trained, it has to be earned. Rodriguez extended his hand. Well, Ghost Rider, welcome to the team. The real team. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Sergeant. But remember, to everyone else, I'm still just the Pentagon desk warrior who got lucky. As Rodriguez left the room, Sarah remained behind with Colonel Harrison and Mr. Williams. They needed to plan the next phase of operations, now that her cover had been partially blown to her own unit. How do you want to proceed? Harrison asked. Sarah looked out the window at the Afghan landscape, where somewhere among the mountains and valleys, other high-value targets were planning attacks against American forces. Her mind was already working through the possibilities, analyzing communication intercepts and planning operations that conventional forces couldn't even imagine. We proceed as planned, she said. But now I have something I didn't have before. What's that? Williams asked. Sarah smiled, thinking about the looks of respect and understanding she had seen on the faces of her teammates. I have soldiers who trust me. And that makes all the difference. Outside the debriefing room, she could hear the normal sounds of a forward operating base, helicopters landing, equipment being maintained, soldiers going about their dangerous work. But now she was truly part of it, no longer hiding behind a facade of inexperience. The Showpony soldier had become Ghost Rider, and the enemy would never see her coming. 3 days later, intercepted Taliban communications would include panicked references to the shadow that speaks our language and the American ghost who knows our thoughts. But by then, Sarah Chen would be deep into planning operations that would dismantle the entire enemy command structure in the region. The soldiers at FOB Reaper no longer laughed when they saw her. Instead, they nodded with respect and wondered what impossible mission the Pentagon desk warrior would accomplish next. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, enemy fighters began to whisper fearfully about the call sign that made their commanders abandon positions and their communications networks go silent. Ghost Rider was hunting, and the war had just changed forever.